Good morning, everybody here and online. Welcome to the Baden-Württemberg Quantum BW colloquium. My name is Leon Rölkötter, and within the Team Quantum at the Fraunhofer IAO, I will guide you through today's colloquium. Quantum BW is the state initiative for quantum activities in Baden-Württemberg, which was established to pool all the relevant competencies and to create an overarching umbrella brand that further strengthens the networks and makes them more visible. With this colloquium, we want to further promote the scientific exchange on quantum hardware and algorithmic topics in the field of quantum computing, to present the latest developments in this research area, and to promote the idea of co-development of quantum solutions. Today, I have the honor of introducing our speaker, Dr. Michael Streif from Boehringer Ingelheim. He did his PhD in the field of quantum computing at the FAU Erlangen-Nuremberg, and after a few years working at Volkswagen in the quantum computing group, he joined Boehringer Ingelheim in 2020. Dr. Streif will give a talk with the title Scientific Challenges to Apply Quantum Computing in Drug Design, which focuses on the challenges faced in applying quantum computing as a practical tool in the design of medicines that go beyond the standard problem of, for example, calculating the ground state energies of molecules. Questions can be posted in the chat. I will be reading that. And with that, I want to give over to Dr. Streif.
Thank you. Thank you also for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. And I would like to talk today about the scientific challenges of applying quantum computing to drug design. Let's have a quick look at the agenda. I would like to start with saying a few words about quantum computing at Boehringer, who we are, why we started quantum computing, and what we do. After that, I would like to talk about quantum computing drug discovery, and I would like to go beyond the message of just saying quantum computers can help pharma, because pharma is about molecules, and talk a bit more about the scientific challenges we have to solve. But the first one is the phase space problem, the many configurations a molecule can be in. And the second one is about the topic that many drug-like molecules are actually easy to calculate on classical computers. And then there's the question why we do need a quantum computer. And then in the second part of my talk, I would like to talk about two research results. The first one is about estimation of observables beyond the ground state energy in specific forces for quantum enhanced molecular dynamics simulation. And the second one is coherent molecular dynamics simulation on a quantum computer. Boehringer Ingelheim, the company I'm working for, is a family-owned pharmaceutical company. We were founded in 1885 in Ingelheim, that's close to Mainz. And we have a focus on human pharma, animal health, and biopharmaceutical contract manufacturing. We have more than 50,000 employees worldwide. And if you check our R&D expenses of 6 billion euros and set this in comparison to our net sales of around 28 billion euros, you see there's a huge focus on research and innovation. And that also was the reason why 6 years back, the company decided to set up a dedicated quantum computing team. We have 5 people in the team with different focus. Everybody has somewhat a quantum computing focus, some people more from applied science, some more from an experimental side. And our goal is to identify applications within the company where we see that quantum computers might help in the next 5 to 10 years. The reason why we are interested in quantum computing, one of them is because the cost of discovering a new drug and bringing that drug to the market is increasing exponentially. What you can see here on this plot on the y-axis is the number of drugs you get when you invest $1 billion in your R&D pipeline. On the x-axis, you can see the years from 1950 to 2010. And what you can see is in the 50s, you got roughly between 10 and 100 drugs to the market. And nowadays, you don't get even one drug to the market with an investment of $1 billion. And just to let you know, this curve is adjusted for inflation. So it's really as bad as it looks. And we hope that technology can change this curve again. And one of these technologies could be quantum computing. In the very beginning, when we started our quantum computing journey at Boehringer Ingelheim, we tried to identify potential use cases across the R&D value chain. For example, we looked at very early stages of research where we are interested in imaging of tissues. Then at a later stage, we are also interested in simulating molecular dynamics, so to understand how the atoms inside a molecule propagate over time. Similarly, we would also like to understand how well two molecules bind to each other, which is called the binding affinity prediction. In the later stages, we are also interested in enhancing atomic properties, which tell you how well a drug candidate gets absorbed, distributed, metabolizes, and also gets out of the body again. Similar, we would like to understand the side effects of drug candidates better. And then very late in the R&D cycle, we would also like to understand use cases better, for example, trial site selection, patient selection, and we are also interested in logistics and supply chain problems. If you now look at these different use cases, what you can see is that these use cases down the road here are mostly optimization problems. There you have to solve very huge optimization problems. The use cases here, atomic property prediction and side effect predictions, are mostly done by machine learning approaches these days. And then we have this bucket of molecular dynamic simulations and binding affinity predictions. And these are driven by quantum chemistry. 6 years ago, we tried to understand which of these use cases are most likely to be enhanced in the next 5 to 10 years. And we still see a potential in machine learning and also potential in optimization, but that's, I would say, further down the road. The first use cases where we can see that quantum computer might help are use cases driven by quantum chemistry. And because of that, we focused mostly on molecular dynamic simulations and the prediction of binding affinities. And in this talk, I also would like to focus on this topic. So how would enhancing quantum chemistry help pharmaceutical research? And to give you some background, I would like to talk first about the holy grail of drug discovery. For us, the goal in research is to find the most promising drug candidate which is able to target a specific molecule, for example, protein responsible for the disease. What you can see here now on the left-hand side are 3 potential drug candidates, A, B, and C. And what we now have to understand in research is how strong is the binding between these drug candidates to the protein. The stronger the binding, the better. And typically, we don't have just 3 molecules on the left-hand side here, but we have hundreds of thousands or even millions of these molecules on the left-hand side. And to now calculate the strength of binding, we have to calculate the so-called binding affinity. And this is driven by not only static energies, but by thermodynamics. So it's a thermodynamic quantity where you can see that you have this delta G, the free energy difference up here, divided by K Boltzmann times T. And T, in our case, would be the body temperature. So what we have to calculate now to get an understanding of this binding strength between one of the drug candidates and the protein is the free energy difference, which is the free energy of the drug and the protein combined minus the free energy of the drug minus the free energy of the protein. And this quantity then tells us, if it's smaller than 0, whether how strongly the drug actually wants to stay close to the protein. And the more negative the delta G is, the stronger the binding. So now as always with thermodynamic quantities, calculating those are quite difficult. As you imagine, the drug candidate, here just B now, can be in many different configurations. So first of all, the drug candidate moves a lot. It can go everywhere, and all of these configurations are valid configurations from a physical point of view. And more severe, even the protein moves. So everything moves. There's a lot of configurations. And what we now would have to do on a future quantum computer to calculate the free energy difference is not only one of these geometries of the molecule, but millions of these geometries of the molecule. And each geometry then defines a molecular Hamiltonian in second quantization looking like this, which we would have to solve on a future quantum computer. Let's have a look at this in a bit more detail. So how we could compute the free energy difference and with that the binding affinity on a future quantum computer is as follows. we would sample a lot of geometries, so 1 to n, and n can here now be in the millions or even in the billions. And for each of these geometries, we would have to first set up the molecular Hamiltonian. As you can see, they all look the same structure-wise, but the matrices HPQ and GPQS, which define the kinetics and also the interactions between the electrons in the system, they are always different. And what we now would have to do on the quantum computer is the following. We would have to put this Hamiltonian onto the quantum computer, compute the constant energy of this Hamiltonian on the quantum computer, then classically combine the energies into the free energy difference by setting up this thermal ensemble. And then we use this free energy difference to calculate the binding affinity. And this we have to also repeat for the different drug candidates. So you can see it's two loops. We have one loop over the drug candidates, and then we have a second loop over these many geometries. So it's very many calculations which we would have to perform on the future quantum computer. The first question, because we cannot tackle this problem immediately on a quantum computer, the first question we had was, how expensive would one of these calculations actually be? And yeah.
But before you go there,
yeah.
So, but this setup is in the Born-Oppenheimer approximation.
That's correct, yeah.
So, what if we ask the question? We do both the atom movement and electronic operations at the same time. Would that make sense if you go onto a quantum computer?
So two answers. The first one, the Born-Oppenheimer approximation typically works for our systems very well. So the error we are inducing because of that is super small. For our systems, we can pretty much neglect it. We also thought about just putting the full Hamiltonian beyond the Born-Oppenheimer approximation onto the quantum computer. But the difficulty there is that it's just much more difficult to then simulate everything, because then you don't only have to discretize the grid for the electrons, put basis function on the electrons, but you need also basis function for the nuclei, and then you are getting in a lot of troubles. In theory, I would say you're right. That would be even the better way to do it, because you have no approximations at all anymore. But from a practical point of view, it seems very challenging to do that. And I would also not know how expensive it would be on a quantum computer.
Thank you.
Yeah, so our first question was now, how expensive would one of these calculations be? And we are focusing on fault-tolerant quantum computing because we don't believe that NISQ will be really solving any problems in industrial setting for us in future, and it's not scalable as we actually need it to be. And that's why we focus only on FDQC. And there the standard algorithm to calculate ground state energies is quantum phase estimation. And our question was, how many qubits and how many gates would we need to implement quantum phase estimation on one of our interesting systems? And for that, we needed to choose a test system. And what we have chosen is a P450 enzyme here on the right, plus a drug candidate. And we have chosen the P450 enzyme for a specific reason. First of all, it is central to drug metabolism. It metabolizes many drugs which come into the body. So understanding how this interaction between the P450 and a drug candidate actually works and how strong the binding is would be very relevant for our research team. And secondly, it's very difficult for classical computers to calculate the ground state energy of this P450 enzyme correctly. And for that, because of that, it's a potential candidate for quantum advantage. So there's a problem. There's a problem here. This system is way too big for the quantum computers in the next 5 to 10 years. The drug candidate is quite small, but this P450 enzyme with all the surroundings is a huge molecule. There's a lot of atoms in there, and we cannot expect that a quantum computer will be able to solve the ground state energy of this full system in the next 5 to 10 years. Because of that, we tried to come up with a simplified model system. So what we did is we first said, okay, let's ignore the drug candidate. This drug candidate is often weakly correlated, meaning that it's easy to solve the ground state energy on a classical computer. There would be no quantum advantage in there. And we also said, let's ignore the surroundings of the P450 enzyme and only focus on the really difficult part in the system, the iron core, which is the chemically hard part of this molecule. And if we do that, we erase the drug candidate, we erase the surroundings, we are just left with the P450 core, which is a iron atom. And for this system, we then said, okay, cool, we have now a simplified test system. Let's check for the simplified, much smaller test system, what would be the cost of getting now the ground state energy out with quantum phase estimation. And we now described the simplified model of the P450 system in an active space using 58 orbitals. And then together with Google, we estimated now the resources required on a future superconducting qubit quantum computer for getting out the ground state energy of this system once. And what we got back was a logical qubit count of 1,300 logical qubits, including then the overheads of doing error correction. We end up with 4 million physical qubits and 8 billion Toffoli gates and a runtime of 3 days. So you can now say 4 million physical qubits, that's a lot, and it is a lot, but that's not what is worrying us. We believe that at some point we'll have this big machine and we'll be able to run this calculation. What's more worrying is this runtime of 3 days. Because as I told you, we need to run this calculation for many different geometries and then also for many different drug candidates. So a runtime of 3 days is just much too long for industrial applicability. And that's also why we try to improve the runtime from an algorithmic, but also from a compilation point of view. And we did several improvements to the quantum algorithms over the past 6 years to reduce the gate count. And then we also collaborated with PsiQuantum to develop, first of all, these improvements, but we also wanted to understand how photonic quantum architecture could help us to reduce the runtime. So we are interested in another technology as well. And what we could do on the algorithmic level is to reduce the, that's not me, right? The background on the screen. Okay. So we were able to reduce the logical qubit count. And more important for us, we were also able to reduce the gate count by a factor of 4. With the, together with the photonic architecture, we were finally able to reduce the runtime from 3 days to 2 hours. That's much, much better than before. Unfortunately, it's still not where we would like to be. To really be able to use this in the research environment, we have to bring this down to seconds or even below. So there's still a lot of work which has to be done to reduce the runtimes, but we are at least seeing a trajectory in the right direction, I would say. So this was the first challenge, computing many constant energies of many Hamiltonians. There's a second challenge when applying quantum computing to drug design, which is the fact that pharma molecules are usually not strongly correlated. I would say in whole chemistry, from an industrial point of view, what we know today is that quantum computers will help us to solve or to find the ground state energy of the very difficult molecules. And what's very difficult is also debatable, but the community somewhat agreed that there are at least two systems where quantum computers might give an advantage. The first one is our P450, which I showed you before, and the second one is the famous Firmoko molecule, which is not relevant for pharma, but relevant for nitrogen fixation. Our problem is describing the P450 better would be helpful. That would be something which we would use in our research. However, it's not the big game changer we would like to see for the pharmaceutical industry. To really make a difference to the R&D pipeline, what we would need to do is to make this much more applicable to many more molecules, to the drug candidates we are simulating. And here we have the issue that most drug molecules we are simulating on a daily basis are very well described with approximate methods, for example, DFT or coupled cluster methods. And there's only a few examples which we know in the pharmaceutical industry where we actually have very strongly correlated systems, for example, the P450. And to really make a difference on these molecules in pharma, what we would need to do is we would have to go beyond these just strongly correlated systems and find possibilities to use the quantum computer also to speed up these approximate methods. So to summarize these two scientific challenges again, we are seeing two questions we have to answer in chemistry for pharma. The first one is which quantities do we actually want to compute? These single geometry constant energies, which are often done in papers, is a nice scientific challenge. And there's a lot of work which was done and which improved the gate counts. But just single energies are not useful for pharmaceutical applications. So what we would need is millions of these geometries. And we would also need to go beyond just energies and focus on forces or other observables. A second thing which we have to solve is to find suitable molecules for quantum computers. As I told you, most molecules are not hard enough to get a direct speed up from a quantum computer using QPE. And harder cases are the exception and not the default in pharma. And what we see, what we have to do is that the naive route will not work. So we cannot just say we use now the quantum computer to just calculate constant energies and then put this to our R&D pipeline. But we think that we have to develop novel algorithms that avoid these millions of single point energy calls. And we also have to develop algorithms which are useful for these weakly correlated systems. And now I would also like to show you some examples of our research where we tried to do that and highlight where we succeeded, but also highlight where we still need to answer a lot of more questions. So one topic we got interested in was the simulation of molecular dynamics on a quantum computer. Because as I told you, we need to generate these many geometries to calculate then the binding affinity. Typically, you don't just random sample the geometries, but what you use in practice is molecular dynamics. Because molecular dynamics simulates the evolution of the nuclei over time. And then these trajectories approximate the thermal ensemble and enable us to compute the free energies. So if we would find a possibility to use the quantum computer then also to enhance molecular dynamic simulations, we would be a step closer also to calculate free energies and binding affinities. To now use the quantum computer to enhance MD, we don't need only the constant energies, but we also need to understand the forces which are responsible to move the nuclei forwards. So that's a new task now. We have to go beyond calculating constant energies or a fixed geometry, and we have to find a possibility to extract the forces acting on the nuclei inside the molecule. And what this means from a physical point of view is that you have your energy surface, E here, which defines the energy surface of the molecule when the atoms move. And what we would like to get out is the derivative of the energy surface with respect to the nuclei coordinate. So that would be, for example, the nuclear coordinate of atom A pointing in direction x. What this means is that we, first of all, have to find an operator which describes this expectation value and then calculate this expectation value on the quantum computer. So there's the issue now. As I said, we would like to do this in fault-tolerant quantum computing. And the algorithm which is very well known in fault-tolerant quantum computing to get anything else is quantum phase estimation. The problem is that quantum phase estimation allows you to estimate an eigenvalue of an operator. For example, of the Hamiltonian, where the eigenvalue then is the energy. The problem, and for us the problem is that if we now apply quantum phase estimation to the force operator, we would get out the eigenvalue of the force operator. The eigenvalue of the force operator, at least for us, has no meaning. What we would need is the expectation value of this force operator with respect to the ground state of the Hamiltonian. And this means that first of all, we have to prepare the ground state of the Hamiltonian on the quantum computer. And then we have to find an algorithm which is able to compute the expectation value and not just the eigenvalue of the operator. And with with standard quantum phase estimation, that's not possible. So what we did is we used an algorithm by Nil et al. From, I think, the 90s, where he already thought about this, how to get out an expectation value of an operator from a quantum computer, and brought this into today's quantum computing techniques. So what we do is we first represent the observable, in our case, the force operator, and then we build a unitary, which is a block encoding of the expectation value, actually. So what we do here is we not just use the force operator as input to quantum phase estimation, but we combine this together with the Hamiltonian and a lot of reflections to effectively build a unitary which has as eigenvalue the expectation of the force operator. As you can imagine, that's quite expensive, but it works. And if we then run quantum phase estimation on that unitary, quantum phase estimation, as always, gives us back the eigenvalue, which is the expectation value of the force operator. So that's a technique we developed. For us, again, the practical question is not only does it work, but how expensive is it? And we did the same as before. We also tried to cost this now. We costed this now for smaller systems, and we only focus on one single force component. And here you can see different systems, for example, water, ammonia, and p-benzene. And you can see how many orbitals they have. For example, water has 24 orbitals. And then we ask the question, how many Toffoli gates do you now need? And how many logical qubits do you need to get out one expectation value of the force operator? And here what we got is quite high numbers, I would say. It's for the water molecule 10 to the power 15, p-benzene has 10 to the power 19 Toffolis. To set this in comparison with quantum phase estimation on the energy, we are around 10 to the power 9 Toffoli gates. So this is now orders of magnitudes more expensive than just the energy, which was somewhat a bummer for us, because we hoped, okay, we can enhance molecular dynamic simulations by easily calculating this expectation value of the force operator. But it seems that getting the force expectation value out is quite expensive. Yeah.
Where is it coming from? Because we need to calculate the derivative.
It's coming from building this unitary. So what we do here is we have to combine the block encoding of the force operator with the block encoding of the Hamiltonian and apply reflections over and over again. So you can imagine this as a QPE wrapped into another QPE. And this just lets the cost explode. But while you were mentioning the derivative, there's a better way actually of doing this. It's more naive, but much cheaper. Instead of doing this route, what you can do is you calculate the energy at one point, calculate the energy at the point plus epsilon, and then you just take the finite difference. And then you just need to spend 2 energy calculations. That's cheaper than doing this expectation value estimation. But still, even then, you need, again, 10 to the power of 9 Toffolis or 10 to the power of 10 Toffolis to get this force expectation value out. And this is, again, much too expensive in a molecular dynamics simulation one. Because in a typical simulation, in our research team, they don't do just 4 steps. They do millions of steps. So if you now imagine that you have to multiply this number, or the number you would get from finite difference, by millions or billions of force evaluations, then it's a very long runtime. And we have a long vision in pharma. Typically, a drug takes 10 years or 12 years to develop, but we cannot wait 100 years for molecular dynamic simulation to finish. So that's still not possible this way.
Is this for arbitrary accuracy or any accuracy?
That's for what we call, so the energy calculation is for something we call chemical accuracy, which is 1 millihartry. And for this force evaluation, there's a similar metric. I don't have in mind what kind of number it is, but it's similar to the 1 millihartry in energy. Yeah. So it's the error which we would require to have to do molecular dynamic simulations in a reasonable way. Yeah. So because of that, we then also try to go beyond using the quantum computer just to give us input for our classical calculations. Because here we now would use the force calculated on a quantum computer, then do the classical step on a classical computer, and then use the quantum computer again. And this is something we wanted to get away from because we saw, okay, that's just not feasible. And what we try to do is now to develop a novel approach where we now do everything coherently. And what we do here is now, instead of using the quantum computer just to calculate the energy or the force of a single geometry, we just put all geometries simultaneously as a superposition onto the quantum computer. So what we would do is we would represent the ensemble, so the positions and the momenta of the nuclei, and we encode this in superposition on the quantum computer. Then we would coherently let the system evolve on the quantum computer with a thermostat, so including the thermal contributions. And then at the end of the simulation, once the system has equilibrated, we would measure the free energy from the quantum computer. And this is an algorithm which we developed together with the University of Toronto. It's, I would say, a proof of concept. It's nothing where we can now put a number or a resource estimate to it because it's a huge algorithm. It would be an enormous effort to even understand what kind of parameters you would have to put in and what would be actually the number of toffolies you would require even for a small molecule to do that. But we showed that it's possible. However, there are still some caveats. So what works is we have an algorithm now which allows us to propagate these molecular dynamics coherently on the quantum computer without leaving the quantum computer. That's nice. And we now target the Boltzmann ensemble, so these thermal ensembles directly, rather than just a single geometry. And as said, we avoid full quantum dynamics, so we don't have to treat the nuclei quantum mechanically. This is something we wanted to avoid because it's just so expensive, and that's still possible in this approach. So the Born-Oppenheimer approximation still works. The problem here is that the quantum resources are very, very high. We have to now encode all geometries in superposition on the quantum computer. And there's just a lot of resources which we would need to actually do this. Then there's a second issue, namely that the estimation of this free energy in our algorithm has an exponential dependence on the number of grid points we're using to represent the geometries. And that's a huge bottleneck. So at the end of the day, this would work, but we would have an exponentially scaling algorithm, which is still exponentially better than the classical part, but still exponentially scaling algorithms are not good in general. So this is something which is really somewhat a deal breaker right now here. And the third point is that the thermalization of the molecular system might take a very long time. And that's a general problem in physics. Nobody can really predict how long it takes until a system is thermalized. And it's also priori unknown. So that's a big issue here because we would have to run the quantum computer for some time. And then we would measure and we somewhat hope or assume that we gave the system enough time to thermalize. If it didn't thermalize, the estimate of the free energy is wrong. There's one follow-up work which we published, I think, a couple of months ago, together with the University of Toronto again, and a startup from the UK, Quantum Motion, where we tried to fix this exponential scaling in the free energy. And we can do this by using a trick from classical quantum chemistry, which is called alchemical free energy calculations. So instead of computing the free energy of one system, we say, let's forget about this, and let's just compute the free energy difference of two systems, because this is what we are, at the end of the day, interested in. We are not interested in the absolute number. We are just interested in understanding, is drug candidate A better than drug candidate B? And the nice thing here is that then we, instead of calculating FA and FP, we just calculate the delta F. And by doing so, we can actually avoid this exponential scaling in these free energies, which is nice. However, the algorithm now gets even bigger because you have to do more and you have to do a lot of steps in between, but at least this exponential scaling is improved. Yes. So to summarize, what we think needs to happen for quantum computing, quantum advantage in drug design is a is a few things. First of all, we know today that current algorithms for FTC, like quantum phase estimation, on future quantum computers will only be helpful for single energy calculations on a small set of strongly correlated molecules. And as I told you, that's not the standard situation we have in pharma. To create now a quantum advantage in drug design, we have to face two challenges. The first one is the combinatorial challenge. We have a huge number of geometries. We have to either find a way to increase the runtime of these, decrease the runtime of these energy calculations by a huge amount to make millions of these calculations feasible, or we have to find a way to avoid using millions of these calculations, for example, by doing things coherently, by using a few random sample energy calculations as input, maybe for a classical model, like machine learning or some fitted model. And the second challenge is the applicability challenge. We have to find a way to make quantum computers also beneficial for weakly correlated systems, not only the strongest, hardest molecules in the world, but we have to find a way to use quantum computers to also solve weakly correlated molecules. And there, the challenge is always DFT, for example, is extremely fast. I think this will be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to do that against DFT. But I guess there's a chance if you look at more accurate methods like coupled cluster. There, I can imagine that we are able to beat in the future also at the speed of coupled cluster with quantum computing calculations. This is something where we don't have an answer currently. We tried this out a few times, but it seems it's always cheapest on a quantum computer just to do the full thing, so quantum phase estimation on the Hamiltonian. And if you try to shave things off, you don't save a lot. And this is a huge challenge right now, but I think we have to solve it to really make a huge difference in the pharmaceutical industry. And as I said, we think that quantum advantage in drug design requires new algorithms, and not just better hardware. For sure, also better hardware. We need quantum computers with millions of qubits, but there we are optimistic that they will come. But then also to use them beneficially in the pharmaceutical sector, we have to find also new algorithms. And this is something we really try to work on in the next 5 to 10 years. To also highlight the thing here on the right, 2 years ago, we also wrote a perspective in Nature Physics, where we summarized these challenges together with some partners. And on top, if you have any questions today or also after the call, after this meeting, feel free to write me an email. I'm happy to chat again. And then I would also like to highlight that we publish and share all of our results. So we don't keep anything internal. We think that quantum computing is still in a pre-competitive stage where we have to work together and be collaborative. And this is also why we publish everything we find. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Okay, are there any questions? Also, you can post in the chat. I'm seeing there are no questions there yet. Go ahead.
So I'll come back to this applicability problem. When DFT is doing good, when the classical computers are able to get what you want, I don't see a reason why we should compete with that. Rather, I would ask the question, is there a way to tackle the bottleneck of DFT for let's say the problems which quantum computers also seems to take much larger effort. For example, designing good functions. Can quantum computers be used for that purpose?
Maybe there's work where people try to do that, finding better functionals for DFT, and I think that's something which is interesting, and that also is something which would help us in research. The problem is it's not clear right now whether this works or not. And then the question is also, if this works, we could also use DMRG, for example, as input to find better functionals. So there's a couple of research questions, I think, which have to be answered to find out whether this is a possibility or not. But I agree with you, that could be a valuable step forward, because if you then just use the quantum computer to generate a lot of energies or something else, and then use this output to generate a functional which then can be used very fast on a classical computer, that would help us. Other than that, I agree with you that competing with DFT for generating energies will be very difficult.
So the DFT gives you the chemical accuracy already.
Not always. I mean, DFT is, but sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. DFT is what is used because it's fast. I would say if we would be able to run couple cluster calculations on the molecules we're interested in, that would be really it's also called like this, the golden standard. I think it's very rare that we need something beyond couple cluster. But the problem with couple cluster is it's just too slow. So if you could develop an algorithm which gives us couple cluster accuracy with DFT speed, we would be extremely happy.
So in all your algorithms that you just showed us, your accuracy is not to the DFT level accuracy, but in general it does, but it's with the chemical accuracy.
It's with chemical accuracy.
So I also have a question. Where do you imagine is the most potential? More on the side of formulating the problems before putting them on a quantum computer, or are the primitives we have, like block encoding, QPE, QSVT, enough, or do we need more development there in that region?
I think you can do good work on both sides. I think working on the input is reasonable and makes sense. This is also how we got this improvement here, because we try to compress the Hamiltonian more. And this is something which can improve things. But my suspicion is that this will not help us to overcome the big challenges I showed you. For that, I think we need, I'm not sure if it's new primitives, but definitely new algorithms, and maybe even new primitives. So I think if you really want to solve the challenges, we have to go beyond the quantum algorithms we have today.
And just curious question. What was your thought process behind, what was your intuition when you're trying to do this coherent algorithm? Like, why did you think that putting them all of them in a superposition and let them thermalize would be a good idea?
Because that's at least my feeling is that if you do something on a quantum computer, getting something out is often the bottleneck. You don't want to measure often, right? You would like to get a binary yes or no answer. And with the non-coherent version, where we do a lot of force and energy evaluations, you have to ask many questions to the quantum computer. If we now do everything coherently, you can imagine that maybe we only have to ask one question even. Is the binding affinity better or worse of molecule A than of molecule B? And then the measurement overhead is reduced. And there's also, I would say, one more argument about the operator scaling of this, because if you measure often, you have a different scaling than if you do everything coherently. If you have to set things together, you often scale with something like 1/√n. And if you do things coherently, you can achieve Heisenberg scaling. And that was somewhat the motivation. So the gut feeling is that if you do everything coherently, everything will scale better from a theoretical point. But we also see that then in practice, if you put numbers to it, the constant factors might kill the advantage again. So I'm not sure where the sweet spot of coherent versus non-coherent calculations are.
All right, then there are no questions anymore. Thank you again for your talk.
Thank you.
I would like to announce the next Quantum BW colloquium, which will be on July 30th by Professor Aparajita Singer from TU Dresden, who will talk about NV magnetometry challenges and opportunities for quantum sensing experiments. Thank you for your attention. Have a great day and see you next time.